Okay, we are very pleased to open our afternoon session. We hope you enjoyed the lunch break in the outdoor desert atmosphere and that you are back energetic. We are in the second health session of the day. My name is Maya Negev. I said it in this last session, so in case you've already heard it, I'll say it again. My dad chose this surname because he loves the Negev. So this is the reason. We used to have people changing surnames in Israel in the early days of the country. And I'm very pleased to host this session together with Dr. Anat Rosenthal from Ben-Gurion University in the Negev and with Professor Nadav Davidovich. We have 3 speakers. Our intention is to have a diverse and lively discussion, so please feel free to ask questions and to participate in the discussion. Our speakers, and we will present them one by one, are Professor Adetoun Mustapha from Nigeria, Dr. Chiyembekezo from Malawi, and Professor Xin Xi from the US, who was just here. And without further ado, we will start with the first speaker. So it is my utmost great pleasure to invite Adetoun, Professor Mustapha. Adetoun is an environmental epidemiologist with 30 years experience working in government, academia, and also the private sector. She is both a research fellow at the Nigerian Institute of Medical Research and an associate professor at the Lead City University in Ibadan in Nigeria. She did her PhD in environmental epidemiology at Imperial College in London, working on air pollution. And she's working on climate change and health, and she's also leading and participating in stakeholder participation events and in policy making in Nigeria.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm glad to be here. Thanks to my mentor of many years, who is, I really need to introduce him, Professor Helio Richter, who I met in 1999 in Greece. I was a student doing MPH in Wales, in the UK, and I attended the conference of International Society for Environmental Epidemiology, a young student presenting a poster, and this wonderful man came around to my poster, had been talking innocently about how people were being deprived, environmental degradation in Nigeria, and he said, come to talk to us at the Ethics Committee. And that was the beginning of my journey that motivated me to do a PhD. And he's here today to listen to me. He lives in Jerusalem. And when he heard I was coming, he's here. So I'm very grateful to him. And to my friend, through him, I met Nadav, Professor Nadav. We worked in Ethics and Philosophy Committee of the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology. And Maya, my good friend. So I'm really pleased to be here. I'm going to be talking about my lived experience, please. So you're not going to see a lot of science. You're not going to be seeing odds ratio. I'm an environmental epidemiologist, but I'm not going to be talking of relative risk and odds ratio. I'm going to share my lived experience. And it is a plea for everyone to come to the head of the Lake Chad Basin because of the number of people involved. So 2/3 of African continents is desert or dry land. For us in Africa, a large proportion of our population, they are into agriculture, and that is the mainstay of most household economy, especially for the low socioeconomic status. However, nearly 3/4 of it is of the land that people are farming on is estimated to be degraded. A lot of subsistence farming is what is going on in Africa. So you can now, and most agricultural process is dependent on the climate. So when there is rain variability, it automatically affects people. So, you know, when I saw the movie we just watched, the irrigation, the drop irrigation, I was like, this would be a dream come true if this operates in Africa. So you can imagine how it is important to us. The region, Africa is affected by frequent droughts. It's particularly severe in the Horn of Africa. Most of you will have seen all those pleas when people are pleading for money, that there is food, there is hunger, and what have you. And the graph you see, the map of Africa there actually shows the moderate to great risk in terms of the yellow and the amber acute risk of desertification. So you can see the way it is spread across Africa. So about Lake Chad. Lake Chad is actually located in the northern Central Africa. It borders 4 countries: Chad, Nigeria, where I come from, which is a population of over 200 million people. Nigeria is the most populated country, black people on earth. 1 in 10 African is a Nigerian. It's also border Niger and Cameroon. But the basin itself, apart from the lake, the basin itself actually covers almost 8% of the African continent. And it's spread over 7 countries, which include Algeria, Central African Republic, and Libya, in addition to the 4 I mentioned before. Lake Chad used to be one of the Africa's largest freshwater bodies and water sources, and is a source of livelihood for over 30 million people. You have a lot of people into agriculture and into fishing in there. But it has shrunk by about 90% since independence. So these photos were obtained from NASA. When I was looking out for this, the 1963 was actually taken by an astronaut, but the 73 to 2001 was by NASA directly. You can see how this water has moved from here to this, and currently by 2001 it is something like this, by 90%. It was the first thing that sent shockwave to the world, that climate change is real in that region. So, like I said, it's located in the central, the basin borders 7 countries, but it's located in central Sahel sector. And it's at the southern part of the edge of the Sahara. Because of the drought, there was a major drought in the 70s and 80s. It now divided the lake into the northern part and also a southern part. And the regular dryness of the northern part has now alerted the international community of a possible lake disappearance. Lake Chad is seen as a symbol of climate change in our region. So if you talk to, it's the poster child that everybody uses when you want to educate people that climate change is real. Initially, it was thought that it was due to overuse, but some recent models in the last, I think, 5 years have shown that the amount of man-made use of that lake does not correspond to the amount of, compared to the volume of the water that has left the lake. Overlaying the issue of the dryness of the lake, now with insecurity, an arm of the Islamic State called Boko Haram, they are occupying that region. So you have insurgency. Boko Haram means no to Western education. So what they do is they terrorize the communities, kidnap people, take taxes from people when they are going to farm. And so a lot of people abandon that area. Remember I talked about farmers around that region. Then you also have nomadic herders. So what has happened in that, because the Lake Chad is drying and there is insurgency there, the herders are moving southwards. And what they do is, while they are driving their animals, the animals go into people's farms, destroy the farms, without anybody compensating anybody. So you have, if there is something major going on in Africa now that is dividing, especially Nigeria, it is farmers and herders clashes. One international organization for security actually tagged the farmers and herders clashes as one of the biggest risks after the terrorism in Nigeria. It is so bad that it has polarized the whole country, and it has become a political issue that people said we need to divide and move away. And the way it is set up is that the northern part of Nigeria where you mostly have the herders, and the southern is where you have the farmers. Land issue in Africa is a very sensitive thing. So if you own a land, it also increases your chance of moving out of poverty. So you have this. Citizenship is also a very controversial thing. You can't just live in a place and claim citizenship. So you have the contention between people you call migrants and indigenous people. So people feel if you are not originally from here, you come in here, you want to take over my land and throw out my culture. So there is a lot of inequality and current conflict there. And there is also the issue of political marginalization of most border communities. In recent times, the Sahelian rainfall has been affected by interannual variability, which is thought to increase the current climate. So when you have unpredictable rainfall pattern, which is believed to be induced by climate change, and the change in the rainy season. Typically, while we were at the presentation, the health presentation before now, the lady from Malawi made a presentation talking about the community can prepare when we know the rainy season, when it's coming. But with climate variability, things have changed. Times you don't expect rain, you have rain, and the length of the rain became longer, and the volume of water became things that the communities cannot manage. So climate change is real for us in our own experience. So this is actually now impacting the resilience of the communities and challenging the international community to promote appropriate, peaceful, and sustainable development initiatives. So what is the humanitarian situation we have in there? There is loss of livelihood in fishing because of the Boko Haram terrorism that is operating in that area. You have a lot of internally displaced people. I talked about herders and farmers. About 4,000 deaths were recorded between 2016 and 2019. You also have various militia groups from different countries coming up. There has also been an accusation that when Libya fell, some of the militia that left Libya came around to all those regions. There is also the arms smuggling, small-size arms dealing operating in India. So it's a very complex situation, a mix of climate change-induced humanitarian situation and terrorism, which now even make it more difficult for intervention by people, because most of the people that nobody wants to go and work there, even for the international aid agencies that are working there, with increasing kidnapping, a lot of people left the place. So what you then have now is about 3 million people that are internally displaced and are food insecure. You have about 500,000 children suffering from severe acute malnutrition, and about 10 million people are in need of life-saving humanitarian assistance. Actually, in that region, 1 out of 2 people have been said to require assistance. So it is really a dire situation. Generally, the health system in Africa, especially is fragile. But when you now have internally displaced people, especially border communities that are rural, they are difficult to access. They are far from everywhere, from the seat of government and what have you. So it now even make it worse for them. So the climate change, the terrorism now exacerbates some of the challenges they have. So in addition to physical violence that people have to face, the loss of livelihood, you've had relatives that have been separated, and then you have a lot of psychosocial problem, stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. So displacement, internal displacement of people against their will has now become a public health issue in that region and a challenge. And this is something that needs to receive more focus in the international scene, because these people are not migrants. They were displaced. But when you have about 3 million people displaced, it is huge. And there is lack of accessible and culturally acceptable and good quality health care. I'm just going to use this study to demonstrate the health indices of most of the displaced people. So this study was done by Ogini et al. In 2021, and it is an in-depth interview and 2 separate focus groups. I need to mention that this was a convenience sample that were taken. It's about 9 internally displaced people camps. So what will happen is that when there is insecurity, Boko Haram invade villages and communities, they run to places where you feel is a little safe. So you have what we call IDP camps all around. So there are 9 of them around. There are about 5 of such in Nigeria and 4 in Cameroon that were involved in this study. But the nationals from in those ID camps are from Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria. And those are the 4 countries that are bordering the Lake Chad Basin. 41 of this study were female and 26 were male. And one thing you really need to look into, when you talk about poverty and education, you thought education will provide some kind of things for people to move out of poverty ladder. 8 people in this ID camp had university education. This is just a convenience sample. So if you go to now do a proper study that involves, you'll be shocked the number of people. So sometimes when you see these statistics in the news, you think it is people who don't know what they are doing or what. But insecurity and terrorism can make a fool of anybody because people are powerless, especially when they are far. So 8 people here having university education, it is a big deal to have a university education in this region of Africa. University education is not free. And so in fact, if you want to climb out of poverty in most African countries, once you have a graduate in the family, it will help the other children out. So when you now even have and sometimes it takes the whole extended family to contribute to educate the university, to send somebody to university. And when you cannot even, then the investment made on this now cannot even yield any results. And when you look at the age range, you have a lot of people between 21 and 40 years in the ID camp, and also 41 to 60 living there. So the 5 indices you're looking at here are what a Penshaw model of healthcare accessibility. And this is the summary of the result. The geographical accessibility is that generally in such IDP camps, thanks to many international organizations that try to come to the aid, but it's never enough. 3 million people at a go. Typically, you will have mostly nurses, you will have general physician, but you will not have specialists in there. Things like maternal and child death for women that are pregnant, you will have there, but there will be a lot of other ailments that people will have that they will not have access to specialists. So in terms of geographical accessibility, in most ID camp, there are lack of equipment at the health center. Even when you call a place an health center, they just provide basic first aid before you then move people out. Then, in most of these places where the IDP camps are, they are still within the region. There is poor transportation. The terrain is ordinarily difficult to access. We've not developed so well our deserts like we have in Israel. And so you have a challenge. Also, there is a challenge with the female accessing health center. Because there is also the threat of Boko Haram can come anytime to attack people. We use a lot of motorcycle, we call it Okada, or there is another tricycle that we use for local transportation. So many people that are into those businesses, they left the region. So what then happened is that for most women, they will not dare to go to health center even when they are sick. Some men will brace up, but most women will not, because they might be raped on the way. So gender accessibility to healthcare is a major issue in those areas. In terms of availability, there are limited health professionals, like I said. You will have nurses. You might have one doctor in about 4 camps, moving around from one camp to the other. You will also have a lot of people that need secondary or tertiary examination will not be able to access that. That certainly is not available in IDP camps. The healthcare center are of poor quality. There is lack of privacy. Typically what you just do is an emergency thing. You just have a place. And one of the things I try to, because religion is a very sensitive thing in this region of Nigeria. You have Muslims, you have Christians, and you have various brand of Islamic practices there. Some of the Muslim women will say they would like to talk to a female healthcare provider. But often because they cannot always get what the kind of people they need, they will not get served. There is lack of privacy, and there is a lot of movement of professionals between communities. So few healthcare providers available, moving around communities. In terms of financial accessibility, of course, they are it's no longer emergency, but a protracted emergency. Livelihood have been lost. People don't even have money to transport themselves to the clinic, and the drugs are not always available. Sometimes when there is health center, you can see the consultation can be free, but they will write the prescription for you to go and buy. But because people cannot afford it, then, of course, that is another issue. Then in terms of acceptability, permission and health access and language barrier. So if there's any place where we have a lot of language, multiple language, it is in Africa. Like in Nigeria, we have over 200 languages. But the major ones are English. The lingua franca is English. We were colonized by Britain. So we speak English for most people that are educated before we even learn our local dialect. But we have 3 main languages, Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa. But in this region, because they are rural area, each community will tend, and the level of education is low, they will tend to only be able to speak their own local dialects. And so when you have health professionals coming in there, it becomes a challenge, and you don't always have interpreters available in such. So acceptability is another thing. And also culturally, the way culturally acceptable to consult a physician, what you do is also an issue. So when you look overall at this, in terms of geographical accessibility, availability, accommodation, and financial accessibility, and the acceptability of the kind of healthcare that people get, all the indices is negative for people in this region. So in conclusion, this case highlights the humanitarian needs and health inequities that are aggravated by climate change in developing countries. And this is something that needs to be a priority in public health research agenda. Like I said, this particular study was just a convenience sample. Even for most researchers, they don't want to go there, or funders, they don't fund things like this. So it underlined the need that the urgency with which international community need to increase the finance for climate change mitigation in such region. If there's one thing that will bring stability to that region of Africa is to get Lake Chad Basin fixed. It has become a political issue. Just before I came for this study, with some friends we are talking about it, and we are going for election next year, and one of the contestants said he will recharge Lake Chad Basin. And people ask him, where are you going to get the money from? And how are you going to do it? And it became a public debate that the politicians have come again. They are making promises that we know they cannot do. So if there's something, my plea, which like I started, is my personal plea. If you are able to provide more data, more multidisciplinary research in that region, any little help we can get to put the data out there, that there is an humanitarian need around here that needs to be fixed, I think that will spur a lot of support for people in that region. This is a region of voiceless people. And so please, my plea is, if you're in any, for you to become ambassador, so please speak up for these people. 30 million people are just there wasting away. And some of them, one of the things that pained me, like when I saw the sample, university education in IDP camp is another lost generation in the making. And I sincerely hope many of us that listen to me will be able to offer one help, even if it is to spread the news. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mustapha, for this wonderful talk. We're going to open the floor for questions and answers. This is your opportunity. Please.
I want to congratulate Adetoun for a very powerful presentation. I believe this may be the only presentation at the conference which looks at climate change impacting on the way it interacts with terrorism and the horrible effects of both together in many parts of the world, especially in Africa. We saw similar trends in Sudan and parts of India and parts of the Philippines. So we cannot isolate ourselves from the political realities that this terrorism creates for all of us trying to create a healthier environments and communities.
Thank you.
Would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I think terrorism needs to come into one of the determinants of health. Before now, we dodge it. I think even in the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology, I remember during his time in there, in the ethics committee, one of the things we talked about is also that genocide, how do we treat genocide? Is it a public health issue? And if you search our heart, it's really, really a public health issue. I was surprised when some of the insights that Professor Collin brought in, how public health intervention, colonialists actually used the excuse of public health intervention to perpetrate evil. I haven't thought of it. Of course, I'm younger, so it wasn't in my generation, but when we look at terrorism, I think it is also a public health issue. But for us as scientists, we have really separated security issue from public health. But I fully agree that it is something that we need to bring into the context of our discussion. And it is not an isolated case. Imagine a full region. The whole of West Africa now is just into completely insecure. Even within Nigeria now, many of those terrorists are coming towards south. People were kidnapped on a train from our capital, going to the next town on a train. And they stay in the terrorist camp. They are becoming bolder and bolder, and they are coming before they engulf the whole of Africa. Because one of the things you realize is that once a place like Nigeria is affected, a lot of illegal immigration into Europe and neighboring countries will come in. So this thing has a way of spilling over to other countries, and that is why it should be a global concern for every one of us.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? You will have to come here, because apparently we're on the record, so everyone has to speak to the mic.
Thank you so much for your talk. You spoke about climate-induced health issues. You first started with the shrinking of the lake that is a transboundary basin for many countries, but you spoke about that no one gave it attention. But why is this lake is not taking the attention as the Nile basin? For instance, in the African Union, or African country unions, or even the discourse I studied in Germany, all we talked about is Nile Basin. We were international students. It was the topic and the money. And so Chad, of course, we learned about it, but there's not a lot of money going there, I think, in research. So you came and validated it. So you talked first about displacement because of loss of lives, then conflict because of the different type of herders, farmers. But I want to ask, wasn't the farming policy from outside? Is the shift, the social transition from livelihood from herders to farmers, was it natural, or was it projects, relief aid projects that I know that went to teach local people how to farm? So I want to ask about this transition. How local was it, and did it affect? I mean, it's a complex situation, but I wanted to ask that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that is the complexity of Africa. The Kenyan ambassador that came this morning, after his talk, we were talking about our challenges. You need to know the history of Africa. Africa was colonized. The Europeans were sharing it among themselves. So I'm from West Africa. We were colonized. We are Anglophone. We were colonized by English speaking. So you have the part of Africa, North Africa and Co, that were colonized by French, even some parts of Africa, so they are Francophone. You have some, like in the DR Congo, that were colonized by the Portuguese. So you have different colonial masters. And because we have been so divided, it is very difficult to have cooperation among ourselves. There was recently a video that went viral online. I think it is one of the European new minister, prime minister, was accusing France of destabilizing Africa. It was on WhatsApp, it was on Twitter, and everything. So, apart from the fact that it is very difficult for us, like we've been conditioned before now, for the Francophone not to work with the Anglophone Africa. We even want to have in West Africa, have a single currency. It was not possible. At the last minute, AU, African Union did. At the last minute, the Francophone, they backed out. So there's a lot of divide and rule, the way Africa is colonized. It's very difficult for them to work together. That is one. The second thing is that most African countries are insolvent. They have borrowed money. Some generation past have borrowed money from the West. So they don't even have their own income. So even as rich as Nigeria is, now Nigeria is indebted. They're using almost 100% of the revenue to service debt. So they don't even have enough money again left to fix education, to fix things like Lake Chad. So, and that is the challenge you have. It's a very complex issue. When you don't have the money, and so he who pays the piper dictates the tune. So when you say people are giving Africa AIDS have not benefited Africa. People they've taken resources of Africa, and there's a huge trade imbalance. Most currency in Africa has been devalued. So the purchasing power of Africa currency is very low. So you have a very complex situation until and that is why I keep saying, until we address colonization and the way Western imperialism is ruining Africa, it will be difficult to break the cycle of poverty. And that is the complexity that comes into play. I think colleague has it.
Look, thank you very much for your presentation. I'd just like to make a comment about the professor's question. Some years ago, I went to an ecology conference in China, and one of the guest speakers was an American general in full uniform. And he started off by saying, "I bet you wonder why I'm here." And he was saying that climate change is the biggest threat against peace in the world. And I was interested in your comment about the relationship between terrorism and climate change. And I think in public health there are what we call policy silences. There are things that are not talked about. So I appreciate you've spoken about terrorism. I think that in the climate change debate, the big silence is war, is the relationship between climate change and war, and the industrialisation and the arms industry and the politics who are deliberately arguing against climate change. I think I'd just like to hear your quick comment on, does that policy silence resonate with you?
It does. It does. And I just wish many younger people listen to this. We just had a debate, like Maya said, in the IIC Ethics Committee. And I almost became a lone voice, speaking against my lived experience in terms of energy access and the way the Western gaze people put on issues. A lot of people, climate change is not just an health issue, it's also a security issue. And if you don't realize that once there's climate change, it will lead to a lot of insecurity. Like one of the issues between the farmers and the herders is triggered by climate change, shrinking of that basin. And if people are not able to connect it, it's unfortunate that many of the challenges we have will not solve. Take, for instance, if aid come, what they will come is to be conflict resolution for the communities is what they will be doing. Instead of looking at the root cause, which is the Lake Chad Basin shrinking, realizing that the trigger is actually the shrinking of the Lake Chad Basin. So I think the older you get in this profession, you realize the need for transdisciplinary approach to most things. I think when I started my career, it was in about over 20 years ago, it wasn't an issue. But now I've suddenly realized that odds ratio, I'm an environmental epidemiologist, that odds ratio and relative risk is not the solution to all of life's problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mustapha. As the anthropologist in the room, I have to agree with your last comment. So it is a real pleasure to invite our next speaker, Dr. Chiyembekezo Kachimanga. Dr. Chiyembekezo Kachimanga is from PIH Malawi. PIH is a social justice and health organization. He is a physician by training and served as the director of clinical programs for PIH in Sierra Leone. And in the last couple of years, he is the chief medical officer of PIH Malawi in Neno. And recently, he has coordinated the response to Ana cyclone in January 2022, and he's going to join us on the podium to talk about the response to Cyclone Ana and the impact on health and health services.
Once again, good afternoon, everybody. I'm also not going to use odds ratio, relative risk. I'm also not going to go too far in the history. I'm only going to talk about events from January to date. My presentation is not entirely academic. It's based on my experience and experience of so many people that were providing support when we had Cyclone Ana disaster in January this year. So there will be a lot of practical things, and hopefully towards the end, the team can suggest some of the things that we could have done better when we are responding. So I think this is the Partners in Health symbol. It has 4 hands. I've always seen it, I've always known it. It comes in different colors. Initially it was black, and then it went to that color, I think it's orange or something. I didn't really know its meaning fully until when we had the disaster this year. Part of it is because I noticed that the response to emergencies is not only one sector per se. It's actually multiple teams coming together to actually do this work. So even before my presentation, I wanted the audience to recognize that a lot of the things I'll present now was not done only by Partners in Health, but we had the communities and the local leaders who did a lot to guide in terms of what we should do. I'm going to talk about 2 districts. Neno district, where Partners in Health works, and another district called Chikwawa, where we had to go in to intervene because there weren't a lot of health intervention into that area. So I'll be talking about 2 districts. So when I mention Neno, Chikwawa, don't be surprised because these were the 2 districts where we went in to actually help. There was a lot of support from the ministry, a lot of support from Department of Disaster Management Affairs, other NGOs. So it was really a team effort. And that's one of the biggest lessons I learned, that in this kind of disasters, you just need a team effort for you to respond. So I thought the next few minutes I could take the time to introduce Partners in Health in case some people in the room have not heard about it. It's a social justice organization, as Anat mentioned. And it works in countries to provide health care. So really the entry is health care with 2 main goals, trying to bring the best medical care possible from other settings to settings where rural people live. So in Partners in Health sites, there's some innovations that typically happens in the West, but as much as possible, we try to take them to those sites because they need it. And of course, we come in with the social justice approach by identifying the ones that are really, really sick and providing the care. Yes, definitely, if you are living in Africa, everybody needs better care, but there's always others that needs more care than others. So we try to isolate them and help them out. And these are countries where Partners in Health work. In most of these countries, it's usually in very rural and remote areas. And today, I'll just talk about that small circle, which is Malawi. It's a country in Southeast Africa. The border is Zambia, Tanzania, and Mozambique. It's very, if you look on the African map, it's like, a tiny worm. I don't know how the colonial team decided to create that, but it looked like a worm. It has a population of about 20 million people. over 80% of the people relies on subsistence farming, not commercial farming. And there is really high level of poverty. Over 70% of the people lives on less than $1 a day. And then for PIH Malawi specifically, started working in Malawi in 2007 at the invitation of Ministry of Health. And then the initial focus was one district called Neno. It was, the district was among the poorest. It was a district without a tarmac road. It still doesn't have a tarmac road until today. On one side, it's in a very mountainous region, and the other side is flat. Before 2007, in the district, there was no hospital. There were only primary health centers. So it was really an area that needed a lot of health services support. So the initial focus was in that area. But gradually, Neno district still continues to be the area of implementation, but we have now focused in other programs. So that's the map of Neno. For this presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'll also talk about a second district, which is Sekode, as I mentioned. It's a district that has about 600,000 people. It lies in the, as part of the Great Rift Valley. So it's actually very flat. And then you could see the lake up there and all the rivers, they actually go to that side before they exit to Mozambique, to Zambezi, and then the Indian Ocean. So because it's very flat, it's a very vulnerable area to flooding and some climate change disasters. So Partners in Health has some clinical focus, which I won't mention much about it, but I think more recently, due to disasters, we have also added epidemics and emergencies as one part of addressing health issues. This is something that we actually added this year. Before, we weren't talking about epidemics and emergencies. And this is not, the clinical areas are not delivered as a singular intervention, but they are delivered across an integrated care continuum of care from the community all the way to tertiary facilities. And then also, the interventions are they are delivered across something that we normally call 5 A's, which are the key pieces of a functioning health system. There is the people. You need to have adequate numbers and quantities, equipment, medication, space. For example, as I said, when Partners in Health started working in the district, there was no hospital. Now there is 2 hospitals that were constructed by Partners in Health but given to the ministry. So that's like a typical example of helping with space. Social support is a core piece because for social justice, there's people that just required some support, and social support is actually a core component. And working with the team to set up different systems is one of the things that we do. So I'll zoom into now the focus, which is climate-related disasters and Malawi. I think for the ones that were that attended the morning session by Shaha, she had mentioned that Malawi is one of the countries that is highly vulnerable to climate change disasters. And I think initially the main disaster, weather-related disaster, was floods in the southern part of Malawi. But since 2019, we have had 2 main disasters, Cyclone Idai in 2019 and Cyclone Anna in 2022. We also had, impact of COVID. But this is also a country where the health system is overwhelmed because there's a lot of infectious diseases, HIV, TB, malaria. a lot of non-communicable diseases with a relatively small health budget. So this is one of the weakest health systems in the world. Climate-related disasters are just making the health system that is already fragile be even more fragile. So the cyclone Anna disaster, you probably saw some things from the news. These are just snapshots from the different news agencies. It happened in January this year. It affected a couple of southern African countries. It started in Madagascar, and then it moves gradually and affected Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and then finally southern part of Malawi. Apart from health, it caused a lot of destruction across its path. And then for Malawi, over 15 districts were actually affected. Over 1 million people were affected by the disaster. And then for the 2 districts that I mentioned about, the district where we implement, we had about 27,000 people that were affected. We had people that were living in camps because their houses were actually destroyed. We had 7 out of 14 facilities that were affected by the disaster. And then the second district, which is Chikwawa, it was the worst hit district in Malawi. As partners in health, we have never implemented in that area. But from just looking at the impact, the whole district was flooded because it's a very flat district. Over closer to 200,000 people were actually displaced. They had over 70 camps within the district, and 6 out of 24 facilities were just the services had just stopped. So we saw that and we said maybe that's an area where we can actually go and help. I think I have lots of pictures around the impact on different people. And this is just a snapshot of some of the pictures. Obviously for us, we had Cyclone Idai in 2019, which we responded. And then we had peace later part of 2019 and 2020. Our attention had diverted to COVID in 2020 and 2021. And then when this came, we're like, okay, then where do we start from? Because we definitely had other priorities. So I'll just talk about the few things that we practically did as a way of responding. One of them is to just support the ministry in governance and leadership. Because by then, when we went to the 2 districts, they didn't have an emergency plan at hand. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to properly do assessments, properly report, and properly plan. And this was the first thing that we had to do was to work with the Ministry of Health to coordinate the emergency response. So we are part of the only emergency operations center that was set up within Malawi, and we're working with different agencies to actually come up with a proper plan to respond to this. We also went to the districts, sit with the local councils and the heads of health sector, and help them coordinate partners, like bring partners together, help them to do the assessments, help them to come up with a plan. And this was literally done within that week when the emergency actually happened. The second thing was medical care, because people were living in camps. People were living in the community. Some of them had direct physical impacts, but there were also others that were on chronic medication, for example, and they had left all their medications home. So they really needed emergency medical care. So we mobilized resources, including staff, medications. We set up camps. We set up a program, and we had outreach to the different camps to actually provide the service. We had to come up with a package for care, because despite the cyclone Idai in 2019, there was no package of health services. And we needed to think through what can we provide there. And you could see the lower picture, that is the police there, because part of it was getting everybody together, but I think we're a lot more worried about sexual and gender-based violence. So we brought in the police to actually help with that. And we did a lot of community mobilization and engagement. I think one thing that was interesting in the two areas where we worked was like we had no electricity for over a week because all electricity lines had fallen down, and it was actually difficult to go and maintain them. So one of the issues was to just keep the hospitals running and health centers running, and that would mean making sure fuel is there, the generators are running, and other things. And I think this is an example of the second district I mentioned about, where we supported over 15,000 people with different, medical services in a space of 8 weeks as a way of responding to the disaster. Now, this is one other interesting thing, because as I said, we came in from the health point of view, and supporting leadership and providing care is something that you all agree that we're supposed to do. But then we had facilities that were not accessible because the road is broken, right? The bridge is washed away. Or facilities that are not working because they are all leaking and there's water all throughout the facilities. Or facilities that are low-lying, that the whole facility is actually flooded. So this actually took us a lot of time. The ministry and the government couldn't respond, so we actually had to reroute resources to help this. And within the district, we had to make sure that 7 out of those 14 facilities are accessible. And it means doing things that we hadn't done, like some of the things that we normally do, like just fixing that to make sure that ambulances can pass, people can go to the facility. So this is one thing that we also learned. Social support, obviously, is something that was needed there and then. We had people that had lost their houses, all their equipment. They had lost their food because in the disaster, we had like over a week of continuous rains. So people had lost a lot of things, and they needed something to sustain them. But this also didn't just come as natural, because we needed to think through who will benefit from the social support. So really identifying the gaps, coordinating the partners, because each partner they were thinking of different resources that they can give, different package, but helping the ministry to bring all partners together, pull all the social support together, and then decide that for every individual, this is what they will get, and this is how we will distribute that. We helped over 9,000 households 9,000 people in one district, and about 8,000 in total in terms of different social support items. I think after the immediate, which took us about 2 months, things were stable. The ministry said the people can now go back to their homes, which was interesting because most of them didn't have homes. But the ministry was like, everybody who is in a camp, you should go back to your home. So that was the instruction, and we couldn't say no. Everybody please close the camps. People need to go to their homes. And they didn't have a home, and we needed to think through, can we provide really low-cost housing that the people could actually stay because they have nowhere to go. It becomes a difficult challenge because the needs were so many. So we needed to do another assessments together with the ministry and think through who are the most affected, conduct an assessments for them, go to their houses, see the damage they have, and think through how do we actually support that. And then I think there were others that just required housing, others that required renovations. And within the district, we were the only partner that thought about the recovery. The rest did the 2 months, and then they disappeared. The government didn't have resources, but we said maybe we can pull some resources to actually help. And this is work that took us from May to sometime last week, because that's when we handed over some of the work that we did. So we made 25 low-cost design houses and 19 renovations. These are not all the people that needed the support, but these are the ones that were identified as the sickest, as the ones that needed the care, and we provided that support. This is just 2 typical examples of how as little as 2,000 can probably make a difference, because you move from not having anything to having something. This is not a standard house. A standard house costs about 5,000 in Malawi. This costed about 2,000. But it provided a lot of the support. These are women-headed households, because we had identified a lot of women that actually need this support. Last week, I visited I think 5 of these households, because we are handing over, and we visited one of the households where it's headed by a woman, lives with the grandmother and has 3 children, and completely lost the house. So this is something that potentially will be helpful to them. And I think this is one of the health facilities with a catchment area of 10,000 people. That was just destroyed. It wasn't there because of the cyclone. And there was nobody to fix it. The government would probably have fixed it. It would have taken it longer. And I was going through the notes, and one of the reasons why we made the decision to maintain it, and it's because of that. So this was actually said by our infrastructure manager when he went to visit, and we immediately said, I think we need to keep the services running. And we actually help to renovate it. And this is just another example of a facility that was also destroyed, and we needed to keep the services open, and we had to come in and just support with the infrastructure. Now, this is another twist to the story, because Cyclone Anna, disaster in January, and then in March, cholera came, obviously related to the flooding that happened. We didn't know that it would come. The government was anticipating that it would come, and we were looking for vaccination, but it came so fast, so quick, even before the vaccines could come in. And now we have a cholera epidemic. It's still ongoing. Almost all districts in Malawi have actually reported cholera cases. And then we switched, right? Because we had the immediate response. We are going into recovery. Then we started responding to the cholera. And then now we have to retrace all the steps, right? Coordinate the partners again, thought through the package of care, help set up the cholera treatment units, make sure it's staffed, give equipment, do a lot of community intervention, including chlorine, wash. The bigger one, which was vaccine. And the government had vaccine, but no money for vaccination. So we quickly mobilized resources and helped the ministry and to do like quick vaccine within 2 months, and we're able to vaccinate over 80% of the population. And now we don't have cholera cases in the district. We do have in other districts, but not in Neno district, and we think we might have been better than other districts because we had responded relatively quickly. Now, there's always a question, because I've talked about the urgent response and the recovery. What about emergency preparedness, right? Because everybody will be like, you need to figure out ways of preparedness. What about community resilience? And one of the things was to extend some of the things that Shaha and Anat has done in terms of really taking a deeper look into the impact of climate-related disasters. So we actually have a team, we started data collection last week to think through what are the impact, how are communities preparing, how is the health system responding? If they have plans, why is it not working? Because every time we have a disaster, we start from the beginning, and we hope that will inform, because we are going to look at different sources. It will be mixed methods, quantitative, qualitative, and we can gain a little bit more understanding to what can we do to actually prevent this kind of disasters. Thinking through a way of responding properly and being proactive is one of the things, as I showed earlier on. This has become one of the strategic objectives for Partners in Health in Malawi, as well as a global organization, by just thinking through what can we do, because this disaster will more likely happen again. And now we're just in the rainy season, and worried about more cases of cholera, worried about flooding or another cyclone. So we have started already regrouping with the ministry and saying, what can we do to actually prepare for this rainy season? Big costs. These are just sample of the cost that we spend. There's still about $200,000 US dollars that I haven't added there. But just show about like how we went beyond what we normally do, because we needed to think about facilities, we needed to think about cholera, we needed to think about housing support, we needed to think about immediate social support. Now, these are lessons that I personally have learned. Some of the people in the group might resonate with me and other settings. A lot of events, right? Cyclone Anna, then we are moving towards recovery, and then we have cholera epidemic. So when you are thinking about responding, resilience, recovery, and preparation, probably in these settings happen together. You cannot have a period of preparation that you don't have any emergencies, and then you have an emergency, because they all happen together. So as part of building the system is thinking through how can we do all these things together. The second thing is when you're on the ground, you learn a lot, you implement, and you make a difference. So I think the fact that we're on the ground with the rest of my team, the clinical team, the community team, the data team, etc., we are really able to implement and support. I think I don't need to mention too much on collaboration. When we are supporting, thinking through short and long-term responses, I think a lot of the partners did the short-term, the social support, but there's definite need for recovery. A lot of these PIH financial year starts in July. The disaster was in January. So it means we were a lot more flexible even with the funding and being able to reroute the funding to actually support this, because it was never in the plan, therefore it was never budgeted. A lot of what I showed was based on what was needed on the ground, because we are adapting to the needs of the community at the time. All right, my time is up. Thank you.
Dr. Chiyembe, I would like to thank you very much for bringing this testimony from the eye of the storm and for all your hard work that you did to save so many lives and protect the health of so many vulnerable people. It's very inspiring, and it's an important lesson for all of us who are also expected to experience extreme events in different parts of the world. We will open the floor for questions, please. Dorit?
Thank you so much. Bravo, really wonderful work. And my question, coming from WHO after many years and knowing Dr. Nima, the WHO representative in Malawi, how do you work with WHO? Are you part of the health cluster? Do you do the coordination, report to them? The vaccines, the cholera vaccines, are you all connected, or what would be your suggestion? Thank you.
All right, I think that definitely brings me to the second slide. We didn't do it alone. So actually, we worked with WHO a lot. They were also part of the Emergency Command Center. I showed that other picture. I would just allow me to just quickly go back. Just quickly go back on this one. Actually, two of the people you see there are actually WHO staff. Yes, so actually we are working together with them. Like sitting together, we are part of the health cluster, getting reports from throughout. But this is the most interesting thing. WHO and the ministry were securing the vaccine. We're on the ground and talking to them and saying, we need vaccine. The minister said that your district is not part of the planned district. If we bring the vaccine, are you going to support the minister or the minister? So we say, yes, we are going to fund the administration. So I think we continue being part of the health cluster, and we work really, really well with WHO. Thank you.
Any more questions? Please, Adetoun.
So, Maya went to COP27. Maya Negev went to COP27. Please, I want to advise you, when next you are going, this is the kind of presentation that should go there. Because when people talk about climate change mitigation, they are very elitist about it. All the discussion, all the sounding, big grammars. But when you look at what happened here, they needed to fix road. I don't know how many aid agencies will want to do that. But if they did not fix that road, they will not be able to get that health care to people. Then they needed to go into building houses for people. The government said, leave the camp and go home. So when people come with talk shop, which is what typically the so-called aids and the big multilateral agency would do, they are not. So please, next time we are going to COP28, it is this undiluted that you should. Thank you very, very, a job well done.
No, I mean, I hope I think for me, as we are thinking about programs, as we are thinking about grants to apply, I think this should be potentially the comprehensive approach to it. Because I think what I've also learned personally is if we integrate and also think even beyond what we are supposed to do as health, you actually accomplish more. But the biggest challenge is always how to get the funding. So I'm hoping that I've also motivated, researchers, because as we are thinking about grants, this is potentially where we should be thinking about. I think for donors, I think UN agencies and other donors, that's another big fight we have every time that I put a proposal, because it has things like social support. It has things like, I'm going to construct this, and most people say, we are not into construction. Yes, we can do maternal health or HIV, but not into construction. So I'm hoping that with this kind of presentation, you're able to know how this is linked to climate support and how this is linked to health, and we can provide as much comprehensive support as possible. Yep. All right, thank you.
Thank you. I really think that as the climate convention, the COP, the convention of the parties, this time that was hosted by Africa, it was more than ever speak about loss and damage, and it was led by Africa, and there was a decision to establish a fund, which is a great first step, but of course we need to see how money gets into the fund and how it operates and gets to the places that need it most, and it's definitely a global challenge for all of us. So thank you very much. Without further ado, I would like to invite our final speaker who came from the US, Professor Xin Xi from Michigan Tech, the Geological and Mining and Engineering Sciences Department. So we are up for a basic science talk, which is great to diversify our session, with a PhD in atmospheric sciences from Georgia Institute of Technology and BS in geoinformatics from Beijing Normal University. We are going to hear now from Professor Xi. The floor is yours.
All right. Good afternoon. First, I want to apologize for having this distressed voice because I'm recovering from a common cold, not COVID, I promise. So yeah, my name is Xin Xi. I'm from the Michigan Tech. So we are located in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, so right next to the Lake Superior. So we just had a pretty bad snowstorm 2 weeks ago. So for me, being here, it feels like going back to summer. And I can take a break from snowplow, so that's good. So for this presentation, I think I can't think of a better place to talk about dust storms than being in a desert environment. And I'm going to go through 2 recent extreme dust storms that happened in Central Asia. And I'm not going to talk too much about the health impact, but I'm going to focus on the atmospheric and climate processes driving those storms. And hopefully I can connect those dust storms with the ongoing discussions of climate warming as well as extreme weather and climate conditions. So on the image on the left, it shows this massive salt storm coming from the dried up floor of the ROC. Is referred to as a salt storm because of the tremendous amount of salt contained in the dust particles. And it's not just salt, it's mixed with all kinds of toxins from decades of agricultural chemicals use. So it's very toxic once it's transported downwind. And it happens in the early summer of May. The image on the right shows the more recent dust storm that happened just in November last year. It was a very unusual dust storm. Based on the media report, it was the worst dust storm in over 100 years of recording history in Uzbekistan. And I think a basic fact of this storm is very unseasonal, meaning it happens in the winter season instead of the typical late spring and summer season. And comparing these 2 storms, I would say this Uzbekistan storm has a larger health impact because the storm plume, although it's smaller, but it sweeps across the bigger cities with more population, in particular this Fergana Valley, which is home to over 12 or more million people. So I think this image gives you a better view of the spatial extent of the salt storm from the LOC, compared to what we here. And looking at this region of Central Asia, I want to mention that the topography actually plays an important role in the generation of the dust storm. First of all, the region has an open terrain in the west and the north, which is conducive to cold air coming from the north, and this cold air provides a lot of energy to eject those particles into the air. Second, the region is bounded by those high mountains to the southeast, which act as the water tower of Central Asia. So those high mountains captures the moisture during the cold season, which is carried from the Mediterranean and also the Atlantic Ocean. And those precipitation mostly falls in the form of snow, and in the spring and the warm season, those snow melt becomes a critical water supply to the river flow as well as the irrigation water. So you can imagine if there is a deficit in the snowfall in the winter, it's going to translate into a drought in the growing season. So you have less vegetation, you have more exposure of the lake and the rivers, which would act as a dust source. So Central Asia is covered by, as far as I know, only one geostationary satellite, which is the European Meteosat satellite, which sits above the Indian Ocean. So taking advantage of that satellite, we are able to track the movement of the dust plume at a 15-minute step. Doing that, we can see how the dust plume is moving around and affecting a larger region. Also, from climate model point of view, finding the location of dust source is critical, and we can only do so with this high temporal resolution image. So based on this 15 minutes images, we can identify these two exposed regions of the LOC as the dust source in 2018, and also these two patches of grazing land in southeast Kazakhstan as the dust source for the Uzbekistan storm. So you can see that the storm came from Kazakhstan, but the biggest victim was actually Uzbekistan. So this is how the transboundary dust storm has a widespread air quality impact. Both storms caught a lot of media attention, and as you can imagine, once you have dust storm, even here, you have elevated PM concentration in the air, which can cause a spike in respiratory illnesses and emergency calls. And based on the media report, in last year, the Uzbekistan caused 30 times higher dust concentration compared to the permitted level. So that's extremely high concentration. I think although the short-term impact is not surprising, I think the more alarming is the long-term impact of those dust particles, especially in the case of LOC. And there have been studies that link the higher cancer rate of the local population to the toxins contained in the lake bottom. And there were even studies that show that the reproductive age women have DNA damages connected to those toxins. That means the future generations are going to even suffer from the health consequences of the drying up of the LOC, which was done by the grandfathers. So, for myself as an atmospheric scientist and a climate modeler, we try to use a model to simulate those processes, and the future goal is to improve our predictive capabilities. So let's take a look at how the current two global models perform in simulating this extreme event in Uzbekistan. So the image on the left shows the dust aerosol depths in the air, which you can understand that as the total amount through the atmosphere. And on the right, we can see the output from 2 global models. A clear finding here is that those 2 global models significantly underestimate the amount in the atmosphere emitted from this dust storm. So we do not have the right capability to reproduce the historical event, and that means we are less confident to predict any future changes. And in the bottom image shows similar comparison, but taking the PM 2.5 concentration data from the air quality site located in the US Embassy in Tashkent, which is the capital city of Uzbekistan. And we have the same kind of finding here, that both models underestimate this PM 2.5 concentration measured at the location. And you can see the PM 2.5 concentration reaches as high as almost 1,000 microgram per meter cube. And based on the US EPA standard, the 24-hour average level, the highest level is called hazardous, and that limit is 250 microgram per meter cube. So that's 4 times higher. Okay, here is some background information on how you can produce a dust storm. Basically, we need 3 required conditions to produce a dust storm. First of all, you need a potential dust source with a sufficient supply of fine-grained sediments. For example, rivers, lakes, farmlands, grasslands. But those sediments are not necessarily able to become a source because they may be protected by water, by vegetation, or some coarse elements like rocks, peppers, which cannot be entrained into the air. So that sediment availability is controlled mostly by hydroclimate or drought, and also sometimes by human activities. When you have, for example, land degradation process, you can increase that availability of the sediment. So those 2 factors explain the land surface size of the story, but even if you have a lot of dry, fine-grained sediments, you do not necessarily produce a dust storm because you need one more factor, which is the wind condition. You need powerful weather systems which provide energy to entrain those particles. And those weather systems can vary across a very large different spatial squares, from say like dust devils like maybe a few tens of meters, to mesoscale events as dramatic as the event called Habub. And for Central Asia, the most intense dust storms are caused by synoptic processes, synoptic scale processes like anticyclones and cyclones. And this is what we are going to take a look at. Now the question is, in the context of these 2 recent extreme dust events, how does the climate warming affect those 2 controlling factors? So let's look at this first factor, which is the sediment availability controlled by drought. It appears that both the 2018, both the 2017 winter and the 2020 winter experienced a severe drought in those high mountain regions. So as I mentioned earlier, when you have a drought or reduced snowfall in the winter, that means you're going to have a drought, you have a dry condition in the growing season. And this is what happened in 2021 when the region is hit by a drought. You have less water and less pasture, and all those livestock are dying off. And I would say that the drought in 2021 is more severe compared to 2018 because you can see the dry condition expands to the Tian Shan mountain region, where you have those high-density population in the Fergana Valley. So now the hypothesis is listed here. When you have less winter precipitation, you have reduced stream flow to the lake, then you have more exposure of the lake sediments. In the meantime, you have also more exposed, unprotected dry soils. And those kind of conditions are perfect for more intense dust storms. So what caused this drought? That's the what I'm trying to explain in this slide. It appears that the ENSO cycle is the most important factor in controlling the winter precipitation variability in Central Asia. I think the same is true for Middle East and also here in Israel. And this relationship is particularly strong after the 1980s. The reason being that the West equatorial Pacific has been warming up since then, which gives us this enhanced gradient or contrast between the West Pacific and the Central Pacific. And this sea surface temperature anomaly is going to cause convection activity in the tropics. And this convection activity is going to promote upper level anticyclone anomaly over this Southwest and Central Asia. So what happens is that you have anticyclone anomaly over this region, and all this air is going to coming down or descend onto the surface. And you can imagine when you have a large-scale sinking motion, it's going to suppress the formation of rain or snow, hence the drought condition in those regions. Also, if you look at the moisture fluxes anomaly over this region, you can see those arrows pointing from southwest, and because of this direction, you have less moisture coming from the Arabian Sea. So this is another reason for this winter precipitation deficit. So we're pretty confident that ENSO is the most important factor in driving those winter season precipitation variability. In particular, La Nina is going to trigger a drought for Central Asia and Southwest Asia. But how about the Arctic? Because the Arctic has been warming up at a faster rate, maybe about twice as fast as the global average. And for Central Asia, sitting in the mid-latitude, is bounded by tropics and Arctic. So Arctic may probably play some role in forcing that changes in the precipitation. And I would just say at this stage, we are not as confident as our understanding in the connection to the tropical variation. So there has been some discussions in the community that try to explain those severe winter seasons in the mid-latitude, which are caused by the Arctic warming. So here I'm trying to kind of steal that hypothesis and try to explain what's going to happen for the winter precipitation in Central Asia. So basically, when you have a warming in the Arctic, you're going to have a reduction of the sea ice. So when you have a larger open ocean, all those evaporation from the water is going to become a source of snowfall in the Siberia. And that means you have earlier advance of snow cover in Siberia in the October. When you have a higher snow cover, it's going to introduce stronger cooling, and then the Siberia high is going to be stronger than normal. So this stronger than normal Siberia high is going to introduce a vertical wave flux activity into the stratosphere and cause the stratosphere to warm up. And keep in mind that this polar vortex around the Arctic depends on the temperature gradient between the Arctic and the tropical region. So when the stratosphere is warming up, the temperature gradient is weaker, so that allows the cold air to escape the vortex and coming down to the mid-latitude. That explains what happened to the extreme winter weather in the US, such as what happened in Texas last year. But back to our story here, I think what happened here when you have a warm Arctic and a a breaking down of the stratospheric polar vortex, this westerly jet stream is going to become weaker and also shift its in its position. As a result, it's going to bring less moisture to the high mountain Asian region. So that's a hypothesis that I think we need a more sophisticated modeling process to verify this process. Okay, so we have covered what happened with the drought condition and the drivers of the drought. So let's come back to the another factor, which is the wind speed, the surface winds that provides the energy to the dust storm. So here I'm showing the hourly maps of the upper tropospheric flow condition in those contours. These contours are called potential vorticity, and you can see those ridges and the troughs, and basically those upper tropospheric flow pattern is going to introduce low and high pressure patterns at the surface level, which is shown in the shading. And you can see 3 days before the salt storm, we can see a declining sea pressure over Central Asia, as shown by that bluish shading. But right behind it, we can see a rapidly developing anticyclone in western Russia underneath a upper-level ridge. And this rapidly developing anticyclone was enhanced by another anticyclone coming from the northern Europe. So we have 2 anticyclones kind of coming closer and merging together. And I don't know if any of you coming from the region, you may remember that in the summer of 2018, the northern Europe suffered a historic heat wave, and that heat wave was triggered by this high pressure blocking condition. And there were some studies that already showed that this kind of upper level flow pattern can introduce simultaneous extreme weather conditions across the entire globe through this kind of circumglobal teleconnection. And this simple illustration just shows you all those extreme events happened in the early summer 2018. You know, you have a heat wave in the northern Europe and the western United States, and wildfires because of the dry condition. In the Central Asia, you have a cold surge because of the anticyclone building, and which triggered the dust storm. So I think it's I can say that this salt storm in Central Asia is part of this spatially compound extreme event in the early summer of 2018. So how about the dust storm in Uzbekistan? This shows the same kind of animation. I think we can find a similar upper level flow pattern in the November of 2021. So when you have this amplified waves in the upper troposphere, and when this wave is amplified, you have those extremely fast development of anticyclone in Central Asia. And if you track the center pressure of this anticyclone across time, you can see the movement of this pressure center and also the pressure level. What you can see that in the first 2 days, this high pressure system increased by 12 hectare per millibar within 24 hours, and then dropped to 7 millibar within 24 hours. These numbers may mean nothing to you, but this is extraordinary. If you heard of the bomb cyclone, bomb cyclone is defined as a cyclone with a 24 millibar decrease within a day. But for anticyclone, that threshold is 5 millibar. And this is more than twice as large. So you may refer to this as bomb anticyclone. I haven't. This is something I didn't coin, but I think this kind of rapid anticyclone genesis maybe worth more attention in the event of dust storms like this. Okay, to summarize our findings earlier, I'm trying to use this illustration, try to explain the chain of a physical process behind the multivariate compound dust storm event. So we have this warming trend in the West Tropic Pacific as well as the Arctic, and this warming can contribute to the reduction of okay, sorry. So on the left-hand side, this is the hydroclimate driver. Because of the warming, we have more frequent and severe drought in Southwest and Central Asia. On the right branch, we have another connection with more intense cyclogenesis, which is linked to this warming process. But I would say the confidence here is lower compared to what we understand about the hydroclimate impact. Okay, looking forward, there are many questions that remain unanswered in the topic of a dust storm. In particular, we don't know the historical variation of this kind of extreme dust storms, and we don't know how the global climate models perform in reproducing the historical trend as well as how they perform or compare with each other in predicting any future changes of the extreme dust events. Also, as you maybe well know, the extreme weather hazard have a disproportionate impact on the socio-economic system compared to those individual hazards in isolation. So this is something that has not been studied yet. And I just want to show this opportunity that we got 1.5 years ago about this NASA project we started working on. We are trying to understand the physical process behind those dust storms in Central Asia, and we will be moving on to try to also understand the health impact and external cost of those dust storms. So with that, I will pause here, and I'm ready to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much for this fascinating presentation and for showing us even better how everything is well connected globally. Any questions? Ala, please, if you can come to the mic.
Sorry that I'm asking, but really amazing work, because I happened to be in Turkmenistan during one of the latest dust storms, and we came there because of, to check if they have COVID, because they haven't reported. And I can tell you that the president there, he doesn't sleep because of that. It's really bothered them because of health impact and the social. So we are going to try to work, and I'll contact you because this is amazing. They are really keen to invest in learning more about it. So thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you for the kind words. Yeah, I think me or my team, we are the very few that have keen interest in Central Asia. So because this region is very difficult to do science. It doesn't have any much of a data, and even they have local data they are not sharing. And I guess it's a challenge, but in the meantime, it's an opportunity for us to fill some of the knowledge gaps in the region.
I have two questions. One about validation, as I said, validation of local data, that if it doesn't happen, how do you validate? And you mentioned drought. And I didn't know if you're talking about hydrological drought or like long-term drought, because you mentioned in a year time span, and I feel like that's too fast. So I want to ask about the type of drought and characteristic characteristics of this drought? Is it hydrological or agricultural drought, and the validation of data on the ground?
Well, so this image I show here is the precipitation anomaly is calculated from the climate research unit, global graded precipitation product. I think it's based on the rain gauge data at the station level. So, I guess that's the hydrologic drought index. But if you are asking about which drought index is more appropriate for dust processes, I would say soil moisture is the best indicator of how much potential you're going to have from dust emission. And I didn't show any results here, but we are using the soil moisture data from the European CCI initiative. They have, I think, daily soil moisture data set spanning back to the 1970s.
Look, thank you very much. I'm Colin McDougall. I live in Australia. And one of the reasons I don't go to public health conferences is I don't get kind of different talks like this. So I really appreciate it. Thank you. Can I please check my understanding? I've just been in a part of Australia where we've had record floods, which have wiped out whole towns. And the explanation I've heard is it's our third La Nina event. So is it the case then that what is the same thing that causes drought and dust storms in Central Asia is also causing floods where I live? Have I got that right, or have I got it wrong?
It could be. I can't say that with 100% confidence, but it could be because the atmospheric circulation is you can understand as a wave. You have wave ridges and troughs, and if that wave pattern is locked in, that means you're going to have persistent weather conditions at different locations. As I showed in this illustration here, you have heat waves in the northern Europe, but in Japan, you have extreme precipitation and flash flood.
In United States, in the 30s, there was a huge crisis, and there is an area around Oklahoma which called the Dust Bowl. Can you maybe in perspective of 70 years, more than 70 years, can you say something about your thought? What caused that disaster? Is it overgrowing, or because this area, it's again and again is sensitive to dust storm?
Right. So the Dust Bowl happened in the 1930s, I think. Maybe a lot of people here wasn't even born at that time yet. No, I haven't really looked into that event, but I think part of the driver for that event was a multi-year prolonged drought hitting that region. And that drought has something, I think it's also connected to the sea surface anomaly in the tropics probably. But in addition to that, I think another driver was the agricultural practices. When the soil profile is destroyed mechanically, and if they are left dry, they become perfect dust source. And that's why in some of the range drylands in Arizona, New Mexico, they are protected. So you cannot ride a bike or motorcycle into those protected areas, because if you disturb the natural vegetation or crust onto the desert, they can become sensitive to wind erosion. But yeah, that dust bowl has been mentioned more frequently in the media. When you have really strong dust events. But I think nowadays we have better irrigation technologies. Maybe that's going to help in the event of a prolonged drought. in developed countries. But in Central Asia, the irrigation practice is still pretty much similar to what they have done back in the Soviet era. That's what caused the LC to dry up, and they are still doing the same kind of thing nowadays. So I wouldn't feel surprised that we are going to see more frequent dust storms if the region is hit by another drought next year, because the NOAA just predicted we have 76%, then next year is going to be a La Nina again.
So, I'm so sorry we are out of time, but I'm sure that Professor Xi will be happy to answer questions after informally in the coffee break. Thank you so much for this very engaging session. For Adetoun, Chiyembe, and Xin for bringing us diverse aspects from all over the world about climate change and health, and also linking to other themes in the conference, such as agriculture and energy. So thank you so much for the audience for participating and staying.